World War II and the aftermath. The Second World War II was between 1939 and 1945. The Axis powers were Germany, Italy, Japan. The Allied powers were France, Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. Around 40 million to 50 million people died during World War II, which makes this the bloodiest conflict and it's the largest war in history. The extension of the Soviet Union power grew in the nations of Eastern Europe. Communist movement followed to gain power in China. The Second World War in Europe ended with surrender of Germany on May 1945. Both May 8th and 9th are celebrated as Victory in Europe Day or VE Day. The Germans surrendered to the Western Allies, including Britain and the United States, on May 8th, but another surrender took place on May 9th in Russia. In the East, the war ended when Japan surrendered on August 14th, signing their surrender on September 2nd. The Japanese surrender occurred after the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th. The date of the Japanese surrender is known as Victory over Japan Day or VJ Day. And as you can tell in the lower left corner, Nagasaki and Hiroshima were pretty close to each other. It annihilated most of the surrounding area, depending on how big the atomic bombs were. The end in Europe. Within 2 years after starting the war with the invasion of Poland in 1939, Hitler took over much of Europe, including France. Nazi forces were defeated at Stalingrad, and the Soviets began to force them slowly back across Europe. In 1944, a new front was reopened in the West, when Britain, France, the US, Canada, and other countries landed in Normandy. In Berlin, Soviet forces were fighting their way through the German capital and raping along the way. Soviets were closing in on Hitler's bunker when he was hiding in. So on April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life so he wouldn't be captured. Hitler was also known for killing the Jews because he thought they were the problem in Germany. He was also the person that invented the Holocaust for putting people in camps and making them work for him. And he starved them and then gassed them to death. The Cold War begins. The Cold War was against the US and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was based on political, economic, and propaganda. Following the surrender of Nazi Germany on May 1945, the US and Soviet Union, which is also Britain, the surrender of Nazi Germany on May 1949, US and Soviet Union, and also Britain and the Soviet Union started to become more of a rival and became uneasy between the countries. Neither of the countries trusted each other. Mostly US and Britain were against the Soviet Union. By 1948, the Soviets installed left-wing governments in the countries of Eastern Europe that have been liberated by the Red Army. Many feared permanent Soviet ruling of Eastern Europe. Soviets wanted to spread communism. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan established an official anti-communist policy for the US and became seen as the beginning of the Cold War. It is a period of hostility and competition between the US and the USSR that always stopped short of direct war between them. Soviets wanted to speed communism as fast as they could through every country. It hit most of Eastern Europe, and also communism was starting to grow in the US. The Iron Curtain speech. Winston Churchill failed to be re-elected as British Prime Minister. So 9 months after he failed to become British Prime Minister, he traveled by train with President Harry Truman to make a big speech. On March 5th, 1946, from the request of the Westminster College in Missouri, Fulton, which is a population of 7,000, Churchill gave the famous Iron Curtain speech to a crowd of 40,000. This was one of the most powerful post-war speeches. In this speech, Churchill gave descriptive phrase that surprises the US and British. This speech changed the way the democratic West viewed the communist East. Many people believe Churchill's Iron Curtain speech was the beginning of the Cold War. Yet in this speech, Churchill begins by acknowledging America's newfound power in the world, and he then offers an assessment of that threat of communism from Russia. In the Soviet Union, Russian leader Stalin denounced the speech as warmongering and referred to Churchill's comments about the English-speaking world as imperialist racism. A little part from Churchill's speech was, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All were famous cities, and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere. And all are subject in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high, in many cases, increasing measure of control from Moscow." Winston Churchill said this in his Iron Curtain speech, and it created rampage through the communists in the Soviet Union. And this changed how people viewed communism today. So that was just a small clip from the Iron Curtain speech that Winston Churchill did. The Berlin Wall. As World War II came to an end in 1945, a pair of Allied peace conferences at